Everyone has a story. What's yours? I launched this channel back in 2009 after launching my startup, a little video production company that was inspired by my time working at Universal Pictures, a big Hollywood studio. It was an exciting time to start a business, to say the least. We were in the heart of the Great Recession, and I needed to learn how to be successful right away. So I reached out and started interviewing some of the smartest people on the planet. And now, a decade later, the rest is history. This channel is now really more about you guys. It's a place where you can come and learn how to grow your business, how to grow your brand. If you only take one thing away from what Gabby says in this next video, it's this: that everyone has a story, and some of these stories are worth keeping, and others are probably best left behind. All right, now let's get into it.
Hi, I'm Gabby Reece, and you're watching Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Good, let's do that one more time. How do you introduce yourself? Are you...
Oh, like what am I? What's my title?
Let's give people some context.
Oh, barf. I had, like most people, a story that I've actually tried to let go of a little bit. When I was very small, my father is from Trinidad. He's West Indian. And my mother is from Long Island, and she was a very adventurous person. And they met in California, actually in Marina Del Rey, so all of 2 miles or a mile from here. And I think they had, it was 1969, so I think it was a little like...
Summer of Love.
Yep. And I was born in January of 1970, and my parents were not together for that long. And then by the time I was 2 years old, my mother was training dolphins in a circus in Mexico City. And she's quite young and, very beautiful, tall woman, and I developed whooping cough. And so a high school friend of hers, or neighborhood friend of hers, came out to Mexico and helped care for me from Long Island. And then when I was about 2.5, I ended up being raised by her and her husband, who had just come back from Vietnam, so 1972, until I was 7. And in 1975, my father passed away in a plane crash. So I was not living with either one of my parents. And so I think if you look at my path, it's probably been influenced by me navigating survival on some level. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really great tool, and we can get into that later. But then you have to adapt, and you have to get other tools and new tools. And so I think that's become really important for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that super personal information.
Oh, it's okay.
You said in the beginning that it's a story you've been trying to get away from. What did you mean by that?
As I get older, I realize that we always have a story. Oh, my parents were this, and I'm this, and it's that. And in some ways, I think it is important to understand. You can use your reference, the story, but I also think it's limiting because it's the same story. And hopefully I've evolved as a person, and I've developed a new story. And so I think when I say that is because I've also realized that I've developed a lot of very helpful traits that have brought me a lot of success, but also will limit me. Mostly you realize it as a parent first, I will say. And then you'll realize that it might even inhibit you in your relationship, even a great relationship, and even certainly in your business. So I think for me, it's like trying to recognize the tale, but not continue to associate with that story.
Yeah, and also, if I'm reading between the lines, it sounds like you're saying not lean on it as an excuse.
Yeah, or just like, oh, that's how come I'm this way.
Right.
Like I have some very intense, survival instincts, and I'm pretty linear, and I'm always looking ahead and planning ahead. And these traits are helpful, but they are limiting. And so also, if I'd like to flourish and continue to flourish, I have to take a look at that, and I'm responsible for that. It's like you can go, well, they did this, so I'm like that, and that's pretty much like, I call it circling the bowl. Then you're there. So when I say that, I am very grateful for my path, because all of us should be, even if it's painful. And there's people who have suffered a million times worse than I have. And so I think it's also acknowledging like it could always be worse, but it can always be better, but it could always be way worse. And I think for me, it's saying, hey, you know what? It was hard, but I've had a really amazing adult life. And as far as I know, we're adults a lot longer than we're kind of young people living under someone's roof. And I also accept kind of that there was maybe some divine reasons, and to kind of go, okay, I'll just sort of grow from that. So anyway, so then I did actually move back in with my mother, and my stepfather was from Puerto Rico, so we moved down to the Caribbean, which was actually really good for me, because also looking back in hindsight, I could now identify with my father's culture because his family is still alive, but also if I went forward, what really bonds my husband and I is actually not that we're tall and blonde and athletic, it's that we were raised on islands. And so I think that there are some things that really have helped me being raised on an island. And then my junior year of high school, I got moved to St. Petersburg, Florida, because I think my mother sort of saw my parents divorced, my stepfather and my mother, that I probably needed some structure. And that's when I got involved with volleyball. So she was correct.
There's a lot of good stuff there. I just want to underscore a couple of really important things I think you just said. Life lessons. You know, a lot of people watch this show. They're at various stages of their life. You know, some of them are new parents.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them, you know, like me, trying to still figure out who we are and where we're going. But you said some really good things. You know, you're right. A lot of us, all of us have a story. We've all been through stuff. And I've shared my personal story of how I sort of played the victim for a while and then refocused and would rather be a survivor than that. But I think what you said too was really important, that your past doesn't define you. It doesn't have to, right? Unless you let it. And it sounds like you were able to find the resiliency, right, to move forward, to move past that.
Yeah.
You know, looking back on where we came from is important. Like, it's tough to reconcile the present before you figure out the past. But it's super smart that you didn't let that define you. You knew that there's going to be more things for you to tackle, and that, you know, it was more about looking forward than looking back. The other thing I heard you say was, you know, that experience did make you stronger, and you recognize that as well.
Yeah.
You know, you're a parent, and you wrote a book about your relationship with Laird, your, you know, your other half who's doing other things in the spotlight like you are. I want to talk more about how some of those, let's talk about, you know, being married like that to someone who, you know, in many ways seems like you're equal, but also you're very different people.
Yeah.
Talk about how you've made that a successful relationship.
Well, I think it first comes to, and maybe we grew into this, I think at first, you know, it was sort of a lot of chemistry and mutual respect, and I think intuitively I've always been drawn to Laird in the way that, hey, that's my guy. Like, I just knew it, and I hadn't really experienced it at that level before. And so, and then as you go, you have to learn to dance a little bit. They don't teach you how to dance. And
What do you mean by that?
you know, just communication, healthy conflict, and
You talk about compromise at all?
well, of course, all relationships of any kind are a compromise of sorts. But I think, something that Laird and I both naturally do, and Laird may be easier, and I'll say it outright, and I'm comfortable saying it. I think men naturally do it easier. Women have to learn is I have to be responsible for my own happiness. And I think men sort of are like, yeah, of course, like that's what you do, right? Like, I'm going to go play basketball with the boys on the weekend because it's fun. And I think women, we have a harder time with that because it feels selfish, especially if you start adding children. We don't play as much when we're little, right? So boys, like, even when they become men, they know how to play and have fun and sort of take care of that part of themselves. And so I think,
well, we compartmentalize really well. We can put certain
Yes.
things, right? There's not a lot of blend.
all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a woman, that's an interesting, landscape that can be tricky to navigate. But I think I've always been pretty good at understanding, and this also probably stems from my childhood, that I wouldn't rely on someone else to make me happy. I will figure that out for myself. And I think I met Laird at 25, so I was already well into my professional career as an athlete, and I had gained a level of notoriety in that pretend, sort of world, and that probably made it easier because I had what one would perceive as an identity, and which I think is a really important word. Because what now, if you say to me, hey, 20-something years later, now I'm always wrestling down the identity and trying to stay in the individuality. Mm-hmm. What do I really want? What really makes me happy? Not how do I feed the identity and the expectation of what the identity is. So that's that lesson comes even later, right? So I had my own identity, but I think for Laird and I, how we navigate it is we are really different. But somehow our values are pretty similar. And so we don't have a tremendous, kind of issues on how we feel about treating people, money, just, even parenting. I think our values are pretty lined up naturally. And again, this goes partially to growing up on islands and being, tethered to humility. In Hawaii, humility is coveted. In the Caribbean, you actually never think about being someone. So you're not really attached to that. Like you never think like, oh, I'm important or I'm someone. You're just like, yeah, no, this is just sort of my job.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's helpful. You don't get caught up in that kind of stuff. And I understood very early. I mean, I met Laird by interviewing him for a television show. Was surfing and this, even though it's his job, it's something that's a part of him and it fulfills him and it makes him who he is. And so I have only been supportive of Laird surfing, always. And I think that's something really important, because what happens is if you are with somebody who has something they love so much and they're so good at it, if you don't have those types of things in your own life, and listen, I love my children more than anything, and I love being Laird's wife, but if you don't have your own thing, you could either grow to resent that, you could be threatened by that, there could be a myriad of responses versus, okay, I'm so happy for that person, they found this thing, and they have a skill set.
Yeah.
Who am I?
Yeah, so what is that for you? And I would assume that it gets reciprocated on the other side, that Laird gives you that respect. So what is that for you?
It's not it wasn't as easy for Laird, though, when we were younger, because in a way, I've always said, listen, he was way better at surfing than I ever was at volleyball. Like, it's a different universe. You're talking about a different universe. However, I was more known. Yeah.
Well, it is a solo sport. Come on. Surfing.
Yes, but he is pretty masterful.
Yeah.
I was really good at volleyball. He's masterful.
He's an icon.
Well, aside from that, it's just his relationship with it is it's layered and it's in depth, and I know it because I live with him. But I think for me, what was hard in the beginning is I was actually more known. So it was the outside world put stress on our union, because if, let's say, even the economics, if I made more or what have you. So we danced through that a little bit, and then...
did you keep finances separate, or did you do joint checking account?
When we were married, we had things together. I think my accountant made me get a prenup, though, because I was married at 27. And Laird was like, yeah, of course, whatever you want to do. Yeah. That was uncomfortable for me.
And you didn't take on his name?
No, that's an interesting thing. I never thought I was more married because I took on Laird's name.
But you had, to your credit, you had an established identity, personality. You were already a thing. Yeah. It probably didn't make sense to confuse your audience.
Yeah, and it just seemed long, and I felt like and also maybe it was some weird thing with my dad being gone. Like, Reece was who I am. But I always say to Laird, like, I couldn't be any more, married to you than I am. Yeah. And if a name, and he was cool, but every once in a while we'd go someplace. My favorite is they go, okay, Mr. Reece, and he's like, perfect,
Well, a name. What's in a name, right? Shakespeare said that, and just like wearing a ring too, it's an outward symbol of an inward expression, right?
That's it. Yeah. But I think it was work related. And maybe that was a subconscious thing too, of me realizing I was marrying a very strong person, that I was sort of holding real estate of my own, and not, kind of selfishly, but just understanding that felt probably important. Because Laird could, eat you alive. He's pretty dynamic and dominating and his own thing. And, if you're not careful, you could get swept up.
Yeah.
And so I think I understood that. I mean, that's what I love about him. But I was like, yeah, it's probably going to be important for me to.
Well, I know you guys a little bit, but I think that's probably one of the things he loves about you too, is that you're a very strong personality. And from what I know and what you've told me, even off camera, basically you run the show. I mean,
Yeah.
you're very buttoned up and you've got it all together, and
I have
he's
nothing
amazing.
together, buddy. Nothing.
Yeah.
But I do run the show.
Yeah.
He's smart.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going.